Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Audio Cycling YouTube channel, where today we're going to be doing a bit of a different video. I have done these sorts of videos at the end of the last 2 years or so, I think, where essentially this is a bit of a chilled, maybe slightly longer video about VELOGAMES and doing a bit more of a deep dive analysis on some of the statistics from this year. And yeah, so just probably get yourself a cup of tea or some other hot beverage and just sit down. And yeah, this is going to be one for you all who are proper VELOGAMES nerds like myself, who just love the stats of stuff. But we're taking it a step further this year. Previously we'd only just have Excel sheets and we'd be doing a little bit of analysis and just showing you points per credits. But this year we're taking things up a notch because we have actually been using Python to do quite a lot of this analysis. I scraped the data using this Python script that I made, and that got 2023, 2024 and 2025 for the 3 Grand Tours. I swear we did do like a VELOGAMES in 2022, 2021, but those aren't available on the site. Maybe I could probably pester George and he could give me the data. But what I want to show you today is just, it's going to be perhaps a little bit disorganized, but whatever it is, I'm going to just show you the analysis I've been doing, the code I've been running, show you some graphs and just a lot of data. So hopefully if that is your sort of thing, then you're going to enjoy this video. And I guess let's just go and take a look. So yes, so I scraped all the data, put it into a massive Excel sheet which has got like over 1,000 rows worth of rider data. I got from a scrape, you can see I got like the year, the name, the team name, the category of rider, so like unclassified, climber, all-rounder, etc. How much they cost, the percent they were selected, how many points they got, and then I got it to calculate a points per credit column in there as well. This is the Excel sheet that I have. As you can see, it's a big one. Like it has got a lot of data in here, 1,600 plus rows of data. It's a VELOGAME nerd's absolute dream, and yeah, this is going to be really helpful for hopefully making decisions next year. So I just did some just pretty normal sort of analysis of the data. I cleaned it up a little bit as well just to make the analysis a little bit easier so it could actually run in Python. And the most selected rider over all the 3 years was Pogacar last year in the Giro. He was 86.2% selected in that race. He is the highest selected of the last 3 years. Obviously don't have data on 2022. Then what I wanted to do is some of these graphs are, because I did them towards the start, a little bit rough around the edges, but essentially what I did here was find the average points per credit at each price of rider, and that produced this graph, which again it's over the 3 years, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but you can really see how the points per credit change over each rider price. So you see quite a big leap up in when somebody gets to 8 credits, steady increase, and then you actually see a slight decrease at 14 and 16 credits, increase up to 18, a drop at 20, over 100 points per credit for 22 and 24 credit riders, a drop to 26, up to 28. We don't have anybody who cost 30. And then 32 over here is pretty much just Pogacar all on his lonesome. And then I was just really interrogating just this data set, seeing what we could try and find, like how many riders got above 100 points per credit in each of the rider categories. So you can see that sprinters actually are generally not that great. The all-rounders, climbers, unclassifieds. Unclassifieds are the rider category with the most riders over 100 points per credit. You could say that's because there are like more unclassified riders than climbers and all-rounders, of course. We'll get onto sort of that later on. But it's interesting to see that the sprinters generally aren't as good as perhaps we think, and that maybe a two-sprinter strategy that we sometimes talk about may not be the best. This is pretty much just all that data, but that data above shown here. But I'll put it in a stacked bar chart to do it by year to see just how things change year on year. So this year is in green. So you can see there's only 4 sprinters this year got over 100 points per credit. Can't really think as to who those might be. It was probably Vernon in the Vuelta, Pedersen in the Giro. Who was in the Tour? Milan in the Tour as well. I can't think of who the 4th one might be. And you see, well, last year was actually a good year for sprinters, getting 9 of them. But you're seeing a bit of an increase year on year for the all-rounders and the climbers. And yeah, they remain relatively consistent actually, which is interesting to see. This is for 2023, 2024, 2025. Yeah, just interesting to see. Obviously, here's Derek G, but we're not really looking at 2023. This is 2025. You can see that Del Toro is the highest points per credit rider. This is the top 10 highest points per credit riders of 2025. Del Toro is the most, 274.2. Then Torstein Tlen, obviously he cost 4 credits. These are obviously split. The colours represent which Grand Tour these took place in as well. So Del Toro, Tlen, Vauquelin, Onley, Healy, the Holy Trinity from the Tour de France this year. We'll get onto them a bit more later. Jay Vine, Hindley, Kuss, Caruso, and Carapaz as well. Quite a few riders. Basically, Jay Vine you can include in there as well. He basically hit 200 points per credit, but 6 riders over 200 points per credit is really big. You can see that actually in this Excel sheet that I have here. This is the top 100. The top 100 highest points per credit riders over the last 3 years. Obviously, you can see Derek G at the top with his massive 400 points per credit. But you see that in 2025, you have Del Toro, Tlen, Vauquelin, Onley, Healy, and Jay Vine. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's the top 10. That is 6 riders this year who are inside the top 10 for the last 3 years. So this has been a very high points per credit year for the absolute kind of top. And you can kind of look at different percentiles and stuff. I haven't done that yet, but maybe I will do if I can. If I want to go even deeper and even nerdier. And this is 2024. You can see obviously Binney, Danny Martinez, Narvaez, O'Connor, Soler, Baudin. I can't even remember where Baudin really did it. I think he must have been a pretty cheap rider to do that. Lando Castillo from that Vuelta, 2 stage wins, Kung, and then Turgis from the Tour. Turgis is actually that performance from Turgis last year in the Tour. He's the only 4 credit rider in the last 3 years in the Tour to get over 100 points per credit. So they don't happen very frequently at all. This is, number of riders with over 100 points per credit at each rider price. Again, this is just over all of the years, 2023 to 2025. You can see obviously the 6 credit riders have the most. I think I printed how many there are. 39. And then you have the 8s after that. 10s and 12s, surprisingly good. You see how big of a drop-off you have from 10s and 12s down to 14 credit riders, who you'll see 14s and 16s are quite bad from all the analysis that I have been doing. Obviously, as we know, 6s and 8s are better. It's harder for the more expensive riders to get the higher points per credit because they have to do really well. And also, there's just not as many riders in those price points. And you can see that in I've got like a total riders riders at each cost. So this is how many riders were at each price point this year. So 152 4 credit riders, 289 6 credit riders, and as you can see, there's just depreciating numbers as you get higher up, as you'd expect, because you don't have a lot of expensive riders. But it's interesting to see how many of the 10s and 6s, 10s and 12s do really well. Yeah, because they're doing like 16 of them out of how many? Yeah, number of riders, points per credit. Yeah, like they're doing really well for like 16 riders out of, well, that's across in 2025. Like they're basically, the conversion rate for 10s and 12s is really good. This is splitting it up by category, per year as well. So you can see again like in 2025, which is in green, you're seeing it's been a good year for 10s and 12s, and 8s and 6s obviously as well. So we're definitely taking a bit of a step up this year. Interesting that the 4s are very consistent year on year, with 4 riders each year over 100 points per credit. I realise this is all kind of like very kind of all over the place, but it is what it is. It's just a big deep dive analysis of numbers. This is the number of riders at each price level for all of the 3 years, as opposed to this graph, which was just for 2025. But you can sort of see how the shape of that is reflected in this. So it's very consistent year on year. You end up with the most 6 credit riders, which is where we find a lot of value for money, as we know. This is the proportion of riders who got over 100 points per credit at each cost level, if you see what I mean. So because Pogacar is the only person who gets priced at 32 credits, and because he has both of the times he was priced at that got over 100 points per credit, that is 100%. But it was really interesting to see how like 35% of 12 credit riders have got over 100 points per credit, and how that decreases for 14s and 16s, but then starts to go up again. 20s not so good. So you end up with these little pockets of good value for money, especially seemingly in the 12s. So that's in, like, think of like Lipovitz this year, for example, would be a really good example of that. So here is the example of, so here I looked at 4 credit riders, so where cost equals 4 and their points per credit is over 100. And you can see, like I mentioned earlier, that the VELOGAME is only mentioned once, and that is Tergis from last year. But you get quite a few more in Italy, and then fewer in Spain. So the Giro seems to be the place to target your 4 credit riders, seemingly, and the Vuelta. In the Tour de France, it's probably better to avoid them and go with 6s, from what this analysis is telling us. And honestly, I can't remember what some of these are. This graph is quite important. This is 2025, so this year obviously. How many riders at each price point got over 100 points per credit in each rider category? So obviously the 4s, because they're all unclassified riders, are all red, because you can't have a 4 credit rider being a climber or an unclassified. We've never seen that. But you see that in the 6s, you see 4 unclassified and 3 all-rounders, only 1 sprinter and climber. But the 8 credit climbers this year were just on something. Look at 8 of them, and this is not consistent year on year. You see it kind of change around between 6s and 8s, but this was a great year for 8 credit climbers, as it turns out. And obviously, as you get higher up, you only end up with all-rounders doing the really good points per credit higher up. This is 2024. As I mentioned, it's not consistent year on year. That's 2025, and that's 2024. And I think I've got 2023 under there as well. So it really does change year on year. Like, for example, in 2024, we had 4 sprinters who were cost 6 credits who got over 100 points per credit, whereas this year is only 1 of them. And honestly, barely remember who that was. Was it Alwa? Did he cost 6 in the? I can barely remember. It was so long ago. But yeah, you see how there were lots of unclassifieds last year. It seems like the 8 credit climbers were also really good last year in 2024, and then in 2023 they were less good. There was only 2 of them there, but the 10 credit climbers were absolutely fantastic. But you only see, as you can see here, really one rider in each of the all-rounder category. Like all-rounders, there's only really one of them who gets over 100 points per credit. This year, like I mentioned, you get a couple more spikes, one sprinter. Also, that was 2024. That was probably Wout, I guess. But this year, like the sprinters were very sparse. That's Pedersen there. He's the one sprinter who did quite well at a higher price. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting to see that kind of progression year on year. This is, again, just 2025. You're seeing the distribution of riders over 100 points per credit at each price point. So goes up to the 8 and then starts to go down again. But you see, again, you kind of go 10, 12 and then 14 is just a massive drop off. Like for some reason that 12 to 14 threshold just really seems to decide things, which I've always had a bit of a hunch about, and maybe you lot have as well. But it's really interesting to see that in the statistics, how there seems to be a massive drop to the 14s for some reason. I think it's just because maybe that's just a certain threshold where it takes quite a lot of points to get over 100 points per credit at that price point, and you have to almost be such a dominant sprinter or seemingly like at least a top 5 in GC. And at 14 credits, you're just in this weird grey zone, like this middle ground where you're not really you're a bit of an outsider for GC, perhaps a little bit more than other people. It's just a strange place, I think, for a rider to be. On the flip side of this, I wanted to look at how many riders got below 50 points per credit, just to see kind of the opposite of this graph, which is how many people at each of the price points sort of flop, I suppose. I just set 50 arbitrarily as a flop, because I think that if you get below 50 at a higher price point, that is sort of like you're probably like DNF to race, I would expect, more than likely. So you can see, understandably the 4s and 6s get quite a lot below there. 8s as well, then you get quite, less, but you see that 14 and 16 kind of category coming in as well, but not many. So that shows that the 14s and 16s sort of hover somewhere between 50 to 100 points per credit, which I'll show in the next graph. And then you got this one person up here who, I'm trying to think as to who that will have been this year. Like would that been like Roglic, probably, in the Giro, I think. Anyway, what I then wanted to move on to was, this is 2023, but I've got graphs for 2025 as well. Essentially, this big load of Python script is looking at, I wanted to split each cost into a points per credit level, which I've set as less than 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100, and then over 100. I don't know why less than 20 has managed to plonk itself just underneath 100. I would prefer it to be at the bottom, but I don't know why. It's just not wanting to play ball. But anyway, I'll show you the graphs anyway. So these are those graphs. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing obviously a lot of riders less than 20 points per credit. When you have the 4s and the 6s, pretty understandable. You're probably looking at what, like 50% of them or so get less than 20. So it's a risk reward sort of thing, because you end up with a few cases where they get above 100 points per credit. 20 to 40 is in blue, so that's quite a large proportion as well. And it's just, you're definitely seeing the 6s. There's more sort of progression. You're seeing more people in 40 to 60, 60 to 80. and 80 to 100 and over 100 than the 4s. So that, that's very understandable. I'd say as a proportion, you definitely see the 4s doing worse. Like out of 150 here, you've got 100 of them being less than 20, which is like not ideal. That's like less than 80 points over a Grand Tour. Whereas, with the 6s, you're seeing this is less than 300, call it 280, 290. So about half of them are less than 20 versus like 66%, like 2/3 for the 4s. So generally you're a bit safer going with 6s. They will score slightly higher points per credit on average than the 4s, but you can get the occasional 4 who's an absolute wonder kid. And then you get the 8s, where this year was really spectacular. You got the likes of, like Onley, for example, would be a really good example of that. And then you see it sort of, the 8s are quite evenly distributed. So you can really get a bit of a hit or miss with the 8s. I realised that these later ones are really difficult to distinguish, which is why I made this graph, which is just from, this graph is basically, imagine it's just split here. Take the 8s, 6s and 4s away, and I just plotted it again. So you can see a bit more clearly the distribution. So obviously you're seeing greater than 100 is in brown. You're seeing, just one instance of each of those, but you're seeing with the 16s, there's this sort of, again, very equal distribution. You've got 120 to 40, 140 to 60, 160 to 80, and 180 to 100. And then in the 14s, you're seeing, they are still good. There's one less than 20. So that's why you see teams doing quite well, which have a very split team. So they'll do a Pogacar and Vingegaard sort of up here. They'll get those 100 points per credit way over here. And then they'll mix it with kind of cheap riders from, a 6 and a 4 and hope that they do really well there. Because I think the top players have sort of identified that this kind of mid-range bracket, especially like 18s, that's a lot of credits to be spending on somebody who's only getting on average 40 to 60 points per credit. That it's better just to split your team into something quite polarized with really expensive and really cheap riders. Although definitely this year there's been a case for really focusing on the 10s and the 12s, thinking of Hindley and Hindley Pellizzari, Jorgensen, all good examples of those kind of mid-range Leapovits as well in these mid-priced ranges are really have been really good this year, and it'll be interesting to see whether that continues into next year or not. I'm just sort of wondering whether I've missed any graphs or not. I don't think that I have, and we've taken a look at the sort of highest points per credit riders. I don't know if I probably could make this public if people are interested in it, but I guess this is pretty much it for the video. We could take a quick look at my kind of VELOGAMES performances from the Grand Tours this year specifically. I will do a separate video about all the stage races if you lot are interested. I'll probably end up doing it anyway, even if I'll just do it because I'm just obsessed with VELOGAMES, just to see what the analysis is, because obviously it's different for stage races. You look at Paris-Nice and Tirreno Adriatico are both 8 stages long, versus you take a look at Romandy and that is 6 stages long. So it would be more interesting to see a points per credit per stage. I did actually do a little bit of an analysis on that. On this, I did a points per credit per stage, which you may think, Patrick, why are you doing that? All the Grand Tours are 21 stages long. But if you remember this year at the Vuelta, that was actually 19 stages because 2 of them were neutralised. So I wanted to make a bit more of a fairer comparison. For example, it's why you see Jay Vine here getting 10 points per credit per stage, which is higher than Milan, despite the fact they got similar points at a similar price. It's because Jay Vine this year, I can't remember which stages they were, but they were neutralised in the Vuelta and there were no stage points given. So it seemed like I needed a bit of an equalising normalizing factor in here, which would play more of a part when you're comparing the likes of a Romandy and Paris-Nice, because you can't compare somebody doing bad, like somebody in Romandy and Paris-Nice, if there's been 3 fewer stages to score points. But anyway, let's take a quick look at VELOGAMES. I'll show you just to round up quickly. So in Italy this year, this wasn't very good. Obviously because of Roglic kind of letting us down, but you know, we did all right with the likes of Tarling and Pedersen, Pidcock, Groves, Fortunato, Bardet. You know, it was all okay. Taberi being an example of a 14 credit rider that was decent, but not 100 points per credit, kind of decent. But I didn't pick Del Toro, so therefore we didn't do that well in that one. In terms of the Tour de France, again, not that great. I think largely because of Evenepoel being that 18 credit rider that only got 50 points per credit. So I was a little bit of a kick in the teeth there. And also Bauhaus wasn't that great, but we did get Lipovitz. And I missed out on the big holy trinity of Vauquelin, Onley and Healy, who were essentially integral to doing well in the competition this year. And then in Spain, we actually did really well. A top 1,000 performance. I kept it pretty safe. You know, Vingegaard, Soler, Gal, Pedersen, Jorgensen, Tlen was a big one. Patullo was pretty safe. Ciccone was not as good, but you know, it was mainly Bizio. Wasn't that great. I could have done a little bit better than Gal with Hindley, I suppose. That would have been a bit of a better move, but that was actually quite a decent performance. But let me know what you're thinking in the comment section down below. It'd be interesting just to hear about, you know, are there any statistics that you'd like me to look to, I don't know, to calculate? Because I could probably let you know in the comments section, or I could put them up in the next video at the start of the analysis of all the stage races instead, because you know, there's probably things I've missed out here that perhaps you lot might want to know. And just whether you like this sort of stuff, I don't know, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I thought it was pretty cool. I like looking at all this stuff because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I've just spent my afternoon doing this rather than anything else. That just goes to show what I'm doing. But anyway, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I've forgotten how these outros go. I haven't done a video. Apologies for not doing a Veneto Classic, but I think I was on a bike touring trip. I couldn't do anything. But anyway, yeah, honestly, I can't remember what the outro is. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.